My daughters called me a burden 2 days before my stroke. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. And when I woke up in that hospital bed 3 weeks later, the first thing I saw wasn't their faces. It was a business card from a real estate attorney sitting on my bedside table like they'd already started dividing me up before I was cold. They were wrong about one thing. I wasn't done. Before we go any further, let us know where you're listening from in the comments. We love hearing from you. The pain came on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just paid the water bill and was standing at the kitchen sink watching the mail truck slow down at the Patterson's house across the street. Then the left side of my face went numb. My hand wouldn't close around the faucet handle. The glass slipped. I heard it shatter from somewhere far away, like it happened in another room, and then the floor came up to meet me. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember the emergency room. What I remember is waking up to fluorescent light and the smell of something chemical and cold, and a nurse with a name tag I couldn't read without my glasses telling me I'd had an ischemic stroke and that I was lucky to be alive. I asked her where my daughters were. She paused just long enough that I knew the answer before she said it. "We've been trying to reach your family," she said, her voice careful. "We left messages." I lay there and stared at the ceiling tiles. I had 2 daughters. Melissa was 41, lived 20 minutes away in the same suburb where I'd raised her. Joanna was 38, lived in the city, worked in marketing. Both of their numbers were saved in the phone that was now in a plastic bag in the bedside drawer. Both of them had received calls from a number marked Riverside General Hospital. Neither of them had picked up. I want to tell you that I was shocked, that it felt impossible. But the truth is, I'd felt this coming for a long time. The way you feel a storm before the sky changes. There had been smaller things. The birthday I spent alone because Melissa had plans. The Christmas Joanna called from a restaurant and hung up in 7 minutes. The way they talked to me sometimes, not mean exactly, but distracted, like I was something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. I'd told myself it was stress, that they were busy, that this was just how adult children were these days, stretched thin between their own lives. I'd told myself a lot of things over 68 years. I was good at it. The doctor came in that afternoon. Dr. Reeves, a younger man with a steady voice and tired eyes who sat down in the chair beside my bed and explained what had happened in terms plain enough that I didn't have to ask him to repeat anything. The stroke had been moderate. I'd need speech therapy, physical therapy. I might have some weakness on my left side for months, possibly longer. I'd need someone at home, at least for the first few weeks. "Is there anyone we can contact?" he asked. I thought about Melissa. About Joanna. I thought about the last time either of them had been to my house, really been there, not just stopping by to drop something off or pick something up. I thought about how long it had been since one of them had sat down at my table and had a meal with me without checking her phone. "I'll figure it out," I said. He nodded, but he didn't look satisfied with that answer. Neither was I. It was a nurse named Deborah who told me about the business card. She came in to adjust my IV line on the second morning and noticed me staring at the bedside table, and she picked it up and showed it to me the way you show someone something they already know is bad news. Carlton and Briggs, Estate and Property Law, handwritten on the back in Melissa's neat, looping script. "Call me when you're ready to talk about the house." I held that card for a long time. The house had been mine and my wife's. Patricia and I bought it in 1989, a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, with a screened porch she loved and a backyard big enough that I could put in a garden. We raised Melissa and Joanna in that house. Patricia died in that house, in the bedroom we'd shared for 31 years. On a February morning 5 years ago, with both girls sitting beside her and me, holding her hand. I had not once, not for a single day since then, thought of that house as anything other than the place where my wife still lived. somehow in the light through the kitchen windows and the sound the screen door made in the wind. Melissa had placed that card on my bedside table while I was unconscious. I set it face down on the table and asked Deborah if she could close the blinds a little. My eyes were bothering me. That was all I said. But something shifted in me right then. Something quiet and cold and very, very clear. I was going to be fine, and I was going to handle this myself. My neighbor from 3 houses down, a man named Chester, was the one who came. I hadn't even called him. Deborah had mentioned to another nurse that I didn't seem to have family coming, and that nurse apparently knew Chester's wife from a church auxiliary. And Chester showed up on day 3 with a casserole dish covered in foil and sat in the visitor's chair for 2 hours just talking to me about baseball and the city council meeting he'd attended the week before, and I could have cried. I didn't, but I could have. Chester was 73, retired, had driven school buses for the county for 27 years. His wife, May, made the best sweet potato pie I'd ever tasted in my life. They'd lived on my street for 11 years, and in that time I had shoveled their walk in ice storms, watched their grandkids during a family emergency, and lent Chester my chainsaw 4 separate times. He showed up at that hospital like it was the most natural thing in the world, because for Chester, it was. "Your girls know you're in here?" he asked at some point. "They know," I said. He didn't say anything else about it. That's what I appreciated about Chester. He didn't press. By day 5, I'd had no call from either daughter. On day 6, Melissa appeared. She came in the early afternoon, wearing a blazer like she'd come from a meeting, her hair pulled back, moving briskly the way she always did when she'd decided she was doing something unpleasant out of obligation. She kissed my cheek. She asked how I was feeling. She sat in the chair and crossed her ankles and told me she'd been trying to reach me. "I don't have my phone," I said. "The hospital has a number." "They called you," I said. Day 1. She shifted slightly. She was good at not reacting. Always had been. Even as a child, she could go very still when she didn't want to answer something. "Things were complicated," she said. "Joanna and I were both dealing with some things." I looked at her for a moment. She looked back, steady. "What things?" I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she said, "Dad, maybe we should talk about some practical matters. While you're resting and have time to think. The house, for example. It's a lot for one person. You're going to need help now. It might make more sense to— Is that the attorney's card on the table?" I asked. The stillness again. "Then Joanna and I just wanted to make sure you had options." I looked at her for another long moment. She held my gaze, and then I said very quietly, "I'd like you to go now." Her expression flickered. "Dad, I'm tired," I said. "Please go." She left. The door swung shut behind her, and the room was very quiet, and I stared at the window and thought about Patricia, about the way she used to say some things you have to walk through, not around. I didn't know what I was walking through yet, but I knew I was going to walk through it. I picked up the hospital phone and called my old friend Calvin. Calvin and I had known each other since 1987. We'd worked at the same manufacturing plant in Concord for 11 years before he went into insurance, and I moved into operations management. He was my age, sharp, and he had a memory like a steel trap and a long list of people he knew. When I explained the situation, all of it, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You want to get ahead of this?" "Yes," I said. "I know a woman," he said. "Estate attorney. Solid. Her name's Kathleen Moore. She doesn't do anything slow, and she doesn't do anything wrong. I'll have her call you tomorrow. Tell her I'm in the hospital." "I'll tell her everything," he said. "James, you doing okay?" Nobody had asked me that yet. Chester had kept me company. Deborah had been kind, but nobody had asked if I was okay, and Calvin asked it like he meant it. "Getting there," I said. "Good, rest up, we'll handle the rest." Kathleen Moore called the next morning. She was direct and efficient and had a voice like someone who had heard every version of a bad family situation and still showed up. I told her about Melissa's card on the table, about Joanna's silence, about the house, about what I wanted to do. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Give me 72 hours. They came together on day 8. Both of them, Melissa in her blazer and Joanna in the kind of weekend casual outfit that probably cost $400, and they walked in like they practiced it, side by side, presenting a united front. I was sitting up by then. The PT had me moving around the room with a walker, and I'd slept better the night before. I watched them settle into the chairs. Joanna smiled at me, and it was the smile I'd seen on her face 1,000 times, warm on the surface and calculating underneath. She'd been doing that since she was 15. "Dad," she started, "we know things got off to a rough start. We've been worried." "Have you?" I said. "We want to talk about a plan," Melissa said, "for when you are discharged. Realistically, you're going to need a lot of support. We've been looking into care facilities. I'm going home," I said. "Dad, the house is mine," I said. "The house is mine." They exchanged a look. I knew that look. I'd seen it at Patricia's funeral. A quick sideways glance they probably thought I didn't notice. The kind that said, "Let's manage him." Joanna leaned forward. "Nobody's trying to take anything from you. We're trying to help you plan. There are memory care facilities in the area that are really beautiful, that have— I haven't had any memory symptoms," I said. "That was a stroke, not dementia, and I've already spoken with an attorney." The room got very quiet. "What kind of attorney?" Melissa asked. "Estate," I said. "Kathleen Moore. Maybe you can look her up." Another look between them, faster this time, and something moving under Joanna's pleasant expression that I could only describe as alarm. "We're your family," Melissa said. "You don't need to be bringing in lawyers. You brought one first," I said. I kept my voice level. I didn't raise it. I'd made myself a promise before they walked in that I wasn't going to lose my temper, because this wasn't about anger. It was about clarity. Your card was on my bedside table before I was even awake enough to read it. So let's not pretend this is about caring for me. Joanna pressed her lips together. Melissa looked at the window. The silence lasted a long time. "I'd like you to go now," I said. "I need to rest." They left, and I sat in that quiet room with the afternoon light coming through the half-open blinds, and I let myself feel it, the grief underneath the clarity. Because that's the part nobody talks about. People talk about betrayal like it's just anger. It's not. It's also sadness, deep and old, for the relationship you wanted and never quite had, for the children you raised who became people you don't recognize. I thought about Melissa learning to ride a bike in that driveway, how she cried when she fell and then got right back on. I thought about Joanna at her college graduation, the way she'd squeezed my hand. I thought about Patricia saying they'll come around in that gentle, certain way she had, and I thought about how she hadn't lived long enough to find out whether she was right. She wasn't right, but that wasn't her fault. I reached for the phone and called Calvin. "Tell Kathleen to move forward," I said. "All of it." I was discharged on a Thursday. Chester and May drove me home. May in the back seat with a bag of groceries she'd packed night she was sending me on an expedition. Chester quiet and steady behind the wheel the way he always was. We pulled into my driveway, and I sat there for a moment looking at the house. The screened porch, the front beds where Patricia's azaleas came back every spring without being asked. My daughters were not there. I hadn't expected them to be. What was there sitting on the porch step was a manila envelope from Kathleen Moore's office. May made coffee. Chester carried my bag inside. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. The documents were everything I'd asked for. The will, updated, the power of attorney, transferred, and one additional letter, typed on Kathleen's firm stationery, addressed to Melissa and Joanna, that explained in clear legal language what I had decided to do with my estate. I was leaving the house to Chester and May. Not the building exactly. More precisely, I was leaving them the right to live in it for the rest of their lives if they chose to, at no cost, as a life estate. The property would then pass to a housing non-profit that provided transitional homes for elderly residents in Mecklenburg County. My savings, my investments, the small amount I'd accumulated in 40 years of working was going to a scholarship fund at the HBCU 30 miles north of Charlotte, where I'd gotten my degree in 1978. The scholarship was named for Patricia. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and read through all of it twice. May had brought a pie. The sweet potato and the smell of it warm in the oven filled the kitchen in a way that reminded me of Sunday afternoons. The sun was going down through the kitchen window, laying long gold shapes across the linoleum. My phone buzzed. Melissa. I didn't answer. It buzzed again. Joanna, a text. Dad, we need to talk. This isn't right. I set the phone face down on the table and watched the light change on the floor. Calvin called that evening. Kathleen sent them the letters, he said. I know, I said. How do you feel? I thought about it honestly. Not the way you answer when someone asks to be polite, but really. Lighter, I said. I feel lighter, he laughed quietly. You want company this weekend? Chester and May are coming Saturday, I said. You're welcome too. I'll bring the brisket, he said. Don't let May bring anything. She'll outdo me and I'll never hear the end of it. I laughed. It surprised me how easy it came. Melissa came to the house 4 days later. I watched her car pull up from the kitchen window, that same new SUV I'd helped her put the down payment on 3 years ago. She sat in it for a long time before getting out. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked at me, and something was different in her face. The blazer efficiency was gone. She looked tired and younger somehow, the way people look when they've stopped pretending. She said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. I offered her coffee. She accepted. We sat in silence for a while, the way people who have known each other a long time can. Finally, she said, I didn't know how bad it was. The stroke. I told myself it wasn't serious. You knew, I said. Not mean. Just plain. She looked down at her hands around the mug. I knew, she said. I was scared. And instead of... She stopped. Started again. I handled it badly. We handled it badly. I thought about what I wanted to say. I had a lot of things I could say. I'd had days of quiet to think them through. But what came out was the truest thing. I needed you there, and you weren't. That's what I'll have to figure out how to carry. She was quiet for a long time. Then, are you going to be okay? Actually okay. I've got good people around me, I said. She looked at the window. Chester and May. And Calvin. And Deborah checked in twice since I got home. She's a nurse at the hospital who, I paused. People showed up, Melissa. Just not who I expected. She didn't say anything to that. There wasn't much to say. She left after about an hour. I stood at the porch and watched her drive away, and I felt the sadness of it, clean and complete. Not bitterness. Just the plain weight of a thing that was what it was. Joanna never came. She sent a text 3 days later that said she thought I was being unreasonable and that she hoped I'd reconsider. I read it once and put my phone in a drawer. By the time the azaleas came up in April, I had settled into something that surprised me. a life that was quieter and more solid than the one I'd had before the stroke. I did my PT exercises every morning. Chester and I had started walking the neighborhood after dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd connected with a stroke survivors group at the hospital that met every other Wednesday, and I was surprised to find I liked going, liked the particular honesty of people who had been close to something and come back changed. The scholarship was announced in Patricia's name in March. The university sent me a letter, and with it a photo of the first recipient, a young woman from Charlotte, studying nursing. I put the photo on the refrigerator where it's still hanging now. Some mornings I sit on the screened porch with my coffee and think about what I thought my life was going to look like at this age and what it actually looks like, and I find I can hold both versions without one destroying the other. The version where my daughters were who I hoped they'd be, the version where they weren't, the version where strangers became family and family became something else, something I'm still finding language for. Chester knocked on my door one evening last month and stood on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and said, "May and I talked. We don't want the house when you're gone." I looked at him. "What?" "You should give it to those people you had in mind. The non-profit. That's where it should go." He shrugged. "We've got our own house. We don't need yours. We just wanted to make sure you weren't alone." I stood in the doorway and I didn't say anything for a long moment because there was something in my throat that made it hard to talk. "Chester," I said finally, "you are a piece of work." He grinned. "May says the same thing." I called Kathleen the next morning and we updated the documents. The house would go directly to the non-profit when the time came. Simple. Clean. There are days when I miss who I thought Melissa and Joanna were. I think I'll miss that for the rest of my life. The family I imagined, the holidays I pictured, the version of us that existed mostly in my own head. But there is a difference between grief and regret, and I've had to learn to feel one without drowning in the other. I gave them everything I had. I didn't hold anything back. If I did it wrong somewhere, I hope they find their way through it. But I am not going to spend whatever years I have left waiting for them to decide I'm worth showing up for. The porch is nice in the evenings now. The neighborhood gets quiet around 7 and you can hear the birds. Chester waves from his yard sometimes. May leaves things on my doorstep, bread or leftovers or once a jar of pepper jelly she made herself. Calvin calls on Sunday mornings. I am 68 years old and I have been broken and I have been rebuilt, and the rebuilt version is not what I expected, but it is mine. And some days, without trying to be, I find that I am glad. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Voices of Uncle Henry. We'll keep telling the stories that matter. Leave a comment and let us know where you're listening from. Every voice here counts. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. That's one thing a stroke gives you that nobody puts in the pamphlets. Time. Time to sit still when you used to keep moving. Time to look at your life without the noise of it drowning everything out. And what I kept coming back to in those early weeks was cause and effect, not in a cosmic sense, not punishment from above, just the plain mechanical truth that how we live tends to produce what we get. Melissa and Joanna didn't become who they were overnight. I watched it happen across decades. Small choices that I let slide because it was easier than having the hard conversation. Every time I wrote the check without asking if they'd tried first. Every time I accepted the excuse without pushing back. Every time I told myself they'd grow out of it. I was building something and I didn't see it clearly until I woke up in a hospital bed, and the thing I built was standing in the doorway holding a real estate attorney's card. That's not blame, that's just honesty, and the difference matters to me, because blame would mean I'm still tangled up in it, still pointing fingers across a room. Honesty means I looked at my part in it and kept walking. What I know now is that character, real character, Not the kind you perform gets built through friction, through being told no, through not having everything smoothed over for you by someone who loves you too much to let you struggle. I loved my daughters in the way that felt safest to me, which was giving, and somewhere in all that giving, I forgot to let them develop the muscle that comes from not receiving. That's on me. I own that. But I also know I can't go back and raise them differently, and I can't spend whatever years I have left apologizing for trying. What I can do, what I did, was decide what the rest of my life would be shaped by. Not resentment, not the cold satisfaction of watching them fail, though I'd be lying if I said that impulse never surfaced. What I decided was that my energy, my resources, my remaining time would go toward something that actually needed it. That young woman from Charlotte studying nursing on Patricia's scholarship, she didn't have a father who could smooth her path. She was building her muscle the hard way. That felt like the right place for what I had left to give. Resilience isn't drama. I want to be clear about that, because people sometimes confuse the two. Drama is loud and urgent and exhausting. Resilience is quieter. It's Chester showing up at the hospital with a casserole dish. It's Calvin making one phone call. It's May leaving pepper jelly on a doorstep without being asked. It's me doing my PT exercises at 7 in the morning, even when my left side aches, because the alternative is stillness. And I've decided I'm not ready for stillness yet. The wisest thing I ever did was stop waiting for my daughters to show up and start noticing who already had. That's the whole of it. Sometimes the family you end up with is not the family you started with, and learning to receive love from the people who are actually offering it, rather than chasing it from the ones who aren't. That is the work. It doesn't come naturally. It requires you to let go of a story you've been telling yourself for a long time. But when you finally do, when you finally close that drawer and turn back toward the window, the world is still there. Still going, still full of people doing ordinary, decent things for each other without keeping score. I'm 68 years old. I have a screened porch and a Tuesday walking route and a scholarship in my wife's name and friends who bring brisket. That is enough. That is in fact more than enough.